As the race for 2020 starts to heat up, so is the debate over reparations for slavery. And the Democrats running for president are quickly learning voters want to know exactly where they stand on the issue. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who in 2016 said that he did not support reparations, had a much different answer during last night's CNN town hall.
Part of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in the U.S. is the legacy of income inequality in the U.S. What is your position on reparations to the descendants of slaves?
Well, as I just indicated, there are massive disparities that must be addressed. There is legislation that I like, introduced by Congressman Jim Clyburn. It's called the 10-20-30 legislation, which focuses federal resources in a very significant way on distressed communities, communities that have high levels of poverty.
So what is your position specifically on reparations? I asked the question because Elizabeth Warren, Julian Castro, they've indicated they want to support.
What does that mean? What do they mean? I'm not sure that anyone's very clear. What I've just said is that I think we must do everything that we can to address the massive level of disparity that exists in this country.
4 other candidates have opened up about their case for reparations, supporting at the very least a discussion. Here's what some of them have said.
What I do find challenging is the best way to do that. How to ensure that it's fair to every individual. You know, we're talking about now 150 years, and there's a process there. But what I believe is that it's fundamentally worth that. But I do believe that the country would be better off if we were to do that.
We have systemic racism, layers of systemic racism that are actually leftovers from slavery. I believe $100 billion given to a council that would apply this money to economic projects and educational projects of renewal for that population is simply a debt to be paid.
Again, it's back to the inequities. Look, America has a history of 200 years of slavery. Mm-hmm. We had Jim Crow. We had legal segregation in America for a very long time. People aren't starting out on the same base in terms of their ability to succeed. And so we have got to recognize that and give people a lift up.
And just to add to that, Senator Elizabeth Warren said that she supports having a conversation that included Native Americans. Senator Cory Booker hasn't taken a direct stance, but has spoken out against the nation's economic disparities. So let me bring in Tara Setmayer, CNN political commentator, and Simone Sanders, who was Bernie Sanders' national press secretary during the 2016 run. She's also a CNN political commentator. So hey, ladies, thank you both for being with me. And I know where you two stand, but, I want everyone else to hear it. So, Tara, starting with you first, how do you see it?
I feel like the issue of reparations, however you're defining them, that makes a difference, because direct reparation payments, I think, is impractical. I don't think that's necessarily the way to go about it. That doesn't say that we're not acknowledging the inequalities. That's all of those things are true. But as a country, we've tried in many different ways to try to rectify those things economically, whether it's affirmative action programs, earned income tax credits, opportunity zones, racial preferences for government contracting. I mean, there have been legislative fixes that have been put in place to try to level the playing field. Nobody's saying that that's perfect, but I don't know that the idea of reparations in direct payments or other ways is even practical. Even President Obama was leery of that and tried to look at examples around the world where there have been reparations to try to make up for things. Like he used South Africa as an example, didn't quite work. India as an example, didn't quite work. How do you apply this equitably? I just don't think it's practical. I think it's indicative of it's populism. It's the rhetoric of populism that sounds good, but I don't know that it's fair or equitable the way you distribute it, or even practical in America.
Okay. Simone, what about you?
Look, I think the conversation, one, I'd like to note the only reason we're having a conversation about reparations is right now is because Estede, a very good reporter from the New York Times, got all of these candidates on the record in a New York Times story, and then also kudos to the Root for the reporting that they did. So the press secretary in me is like, I don't know if we should answer the inquiry. But I will say,
me too. I'm like, oh,
right,
man,
come
you know,
on now.
reparations, that's a tough one. It's been going on for like 20 years, right? Bill Clinton
But
was talking about that.
I am glad that campaigns and candidates are willing to talk about it. And I'll say that the definition that the New York Times used for reparations was the concept of, one, the acknowledgement of from the federal government of the ongoing impact of slavery and discrimination, and this "and" is really important, and some form of compensation payment to those directly affected. And so that is the definition that Estede used in his reporting for the New York Times when he asked a number of campaigns what they thought about reparations.
And do you like that definition?
I do like that definition. Now, when you talk about compensation can take many different forms. But I think the idea of reparations, one, an acknowledgement from the federal government, of the ongoing impact of slavery, and some type of compensation, I don't think it's crazy. Now, I think that there are a safe place for candidates who want to come out and talk about reparations, who are willing to be on the record, is when specifically of the idea of reparations, is to be supporting a bill that former Congressman John Conyers had introduced in Congress almost every year.
He started in 1989. Yep,
started
it's
in
been a
1989
while.
when I was born. Okay, about 29, 30 years at this point. Yes, I'm about 30. But the bill is not a bill that gives reparations, y'all. The bill is a bill to establish a commission to study, to do research. And so I actually think that's a safe place to be, because you heard all the presidential candidates say, well, even Bernie was like, well, what do they mean? And I don't think that there's a clear answer to what reparations would exactly look like.
But I go back to, and I was rereading what Barack Obama, when he was running for president back in 2007, and Tara, you mentioned this a second ago, you know, when he was talking about this, and he wrote this to the NAACP, and he said, I have the quote, he said, that the reparations would be used as an excuse for some to say we've paid our debt and to avoid the much harder work. Meaning, like, people would say, all right, you've been paid back, all right, thanks, bye. Like, we don't need to work any harder. I mean, is that not?
I mean, I think that that's not the panacea. You know, you're looking at multi-generational issues as a result of Jim Crow, and as a result of the economic inequalities and the fact that, you know, Black America did not, started 10 feet behind everybody else because of those things. But how do you rectify that now in the form of direct payments? How do you distribute that equitably? You just don't say, okay, well, here's $60,000 to everyone and good luck, it's over. No, I mean, there's attitudinal changes that need to happen. There are institutional changes that need to happen that I think the country is working on. And I just don't know that direct payments will do it. I mean, they use the example of lottery winners, right? What happens when people win a large sum of money? A lot of times lottery winners go bankrupt. So is a sum of money the answer to this? No, there's a lot of other things that go into developing Black wealth that I think could be done as opposed to direct payments. I just don't know how you do that.
I guess I want to push back on. I want to push back on that idea for a minute, only because, I mean, there's Census Bureau data right now that says for every $100 that a white family earns, a Black family of the same socioeconomic status, same educational background, earns $5. And so when folks are talking about the wealth gap in America, when you specifically talk about the gap between white Americans and Black Americans of the same socioeconomic status, it's more like a chasm, not just a gap. And so that's why I think you've seen candidates like Cory Booker talk about a baby bonds bill. You've seen Kamala Harris talk about her LIFT Act. But when you talk specifically about this idea of reparations, again, part of it is the acknowledgement from the federal government of the ongoing effects of slavery and discrimination. So that part could actually be,
Simone, actually.
Exactly.
I think there should
so
be an
that part could be
acknowledgement of it.
rectified. Yes, that part could be rectified, not just in words, but in also actual policy. But in this compensation question, I tend to agree with Tara, and I don't know if, the $100 billion, for example, that Marianne Williamson has proposed is the answer. But that is why I think if we're going to have a conversation about this, it should be a research-based conversation, which is why a safe place for candidates to be, if I was advising anybody, would be to support.
Well, we now know. We know Sheila Jackson Lee has taken this back up. So you mentioned Conyers back in '89. No, but we need more. We need more research, and perhaps. But this is something, it would be interesting to see how the politics of all this plays out. But these Democratic contenders are being asked about it, and we're getting answers certainly going into 2020. Ladies, I got to go. we'll end on the agreement. Simone Sanders and Tara Setmayer, good to see both of you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to Michael.